Café Scientifique is a monthly series of expert-led discussions on science and culture presented by the Bell Museum of Natural History. For more information about the Bell Museum, or to find out about upcoming Café Scientifique programs, visit bellmuseum.org or find us on Facebook and Twitter.
Good evening and welcome to Café Scientifique. Hey, all right! And from the university, warmest winter wishes. In English, Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah. We have a very good show tonight. We're very excited about it. Now we're going to turn it over to Leah and for our introduction.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. Sure. We're making a podcast, as always, so we're going to try to get voices on the mics tonight. We also are going to post visuals, because it's a very visual presentation that Tim's going to give us tonight, within a couple of weeks, and with the voiceover on our YouTube channel, so you'll get a chance to go back and revisit some of the awesome pictures that Tim has brought. And I don't want to take any more of your time, but I will say that Tim Quady, who's the owner of Blue Rhino Studios, which is this exhibit building world-class design and fabrication firm in Eagan, will tell you all about his own story. But 22 years ago, he met Don Luce when he was taking a drawing class. Yep, Don Luce being our curator of exhibits. So he actually has a long history with us at the Bell. And I'm going to hand the mic over to him so that he can tell you the rest of the story. So please give a welcome to our guest, Tim Quady.
Thank you, folks. Thank you for coming out. It's odd to me that anybody would actually travel out, much less I think you paid money to hear me speak. That is very strange, and I think my wife would second that because she would pay money to hear me not speak. She likes to say that there's two types of people in the world. There are those who are very good listeners, and then there are those who are just simply waiting for their chance to talk. You are the latter. You'll do fine tonight. I've never spoken, even to a crowd, and I've never put a PowerPoint together until this morning, so please bear with me. I will do my best. My name is Tim Quady. I'm from Blue Rhino Studio. I have the unique privilege to work with a phenomenal group of human beings, talented artists, very, very gifted craftspeople, very inventive, and just wonderful, wonderful people. And what I'm really here to do tonight is to show them off to you. I started in the museum industry 25 years ago, and I have inadvertently grown up to actually run a small company. So I'm not in the studio as often as I would like. I'm hardly there at all. But it does allow me the rare privilege to basically show off. When I put pictures up here, what you see is not my work. I'm a hopefully very important part of the machine that allows this work to happen. But I'm prefacing all of this so I can say I can brag a lot now because I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about them. So I was asked to come give a talk, and I decided very, very late to give it a title. And I thought, well, Museum Diorama Design and Fabrication. They'd asked me to talk about recreating Pleistocene animals. I think more for my skill set and what I do, I think it's more about dioramas in general and how they work. I also think that if I were going to title it, it should be the opportunities presented by reality. So dioramas in a very general sense are a snapshot of action in a place, in a time, and what they consist of typically and historically would be subject or subjects in 3D in some kind of environment with a mural background, which allows them to have the opportunity to tell a much, much greater story in a very limited amount of space. How do you bring the world into a room? So we at Blue Rhino Studio create dioramas, everything from sculptures to structure, the environments and the murals that pull them all together into a finished piece. And look, now we've burst into colors, and there's the crew. We decided to define ourselves a couple years ago as people who specifically do work for museums, visitor centers, and zoos. We engage, educate, and inspire. Most often through partnering with our clients who are experts in their fields. We are not necessarily. So we have a great understanding of the craft of what we do and the mechanics. I consider us to be craftspeople, artists. A lot of folks in the shop do have a great grasp on content and have a good head start or a decent base knowledge of anything that we might be working on creating. But in the end, we never know as much about the subject as our clients do. And so along with, I think, an intense amount of pride in what we do and strong beliefs in ourselves, we have a tremendous amount of humility to know that we make educated guesses and rely on our clients to help steer what things should be, what they should look like. So for putting things into a sort of perspective, I thought I'd break it down into real basic terms. So within dioramas or displays, there are the traditional enclosed dioramas, like at the Bell. Over time, there's been more and more exposed dioramas that are not behind glass, maybe things that you can walk around. And even more recently, things have become much more immersive to walk through or things that you can actually touch. And then within these varieties of exhibits, there are permanent pieces, there are temporary pieces, and there are traveling pieces. All of these propose different sets of challenges no matter what the medium is or where it's going. And I'll touch on two of those tonight. But across the board, no matter who we're working for or what we do, there are limiting factors everywhere. Budget, space, time, weight, and access to a space. They inform the design. They lead us through what we can and can't do. They help inform our decisions on what we will make. So if we start kind of at the beginning, just to give you a general sense, the traditional enclosed diorama allows you the opportunity to work with much more fragile materials because they will be protected from people. They'll be protected, hopefully, from a lot of dust and foreign elements. So real fur, real feathers, real preserved grasses, all sorts of things that as long as they're behind glass and protected, you can use. Exposed dioramas are things that are out in the open. They're usually protected by reading rails or glass or somewhat out of reach. And those I think the thinking is it allows you to be a little more engaged as a visitor, to feel like you're right up front, that you can lean in and see. But they still have limitations. So you'll see in these photos that anything that's fragile is back behind rails. It's still a little out of reach. And everything in here, there is taxidermy that we did not do, but the plants and the ground forms that we created, everything is artificial. There's nothing preserved in here, so that it is a little more durable because it does need to be cleaned and dusted and maintained. And I just thought you'd like to see some water. And then finally, there's the immersive diorama, and these are things that you get to walk up to, walk through, put your hands on. This specific example has pieces that are also not touchable. The silver bar across the bottom will eventually hold a piece of glass to keep you more than arm's length from the sculpted plants, but other elements that are in the foreground, like the shells that are down on the bottom, those are touchable if you were so inclined to be a poor guest. Along with those now, I think there's been a large surge in touchable sculptures, things that people can interact with. I feel like a lot of people are looking for photo ops, which I think is actually a very good thing because in the museum industry, I don't think anything will ever give you the PR and the advertisement that you get from go stand up there and I'll take your picture, and then I'm on my phone and I'm going to text it to somebody and I'm going to put it on my Facebook page. I'm going to do whatever. So I'm actually a fan of these, although I'd love to do things that were fully encased in dioramas so we could control the entire environment, and I think we could really tell a much larger story. it really always comes down to budget, time, space, weight, all those same limiting factors. So when the important thing is to talk about a Columbian mammoth, here's a Columbian mammoth. You can walk all the way around it. And they address its environment in different ways. Now, even though they're touchable, we've been able to put a fair amount of detail into things. So, and in some cases, not only are they touchable, but they're intended to be touchable. So this is a dinosaur for the Denver Museum of Science and Nature that was specifically made to go in their kids section and lay on the ground so toddlers can interact with it. And we sent them pictures, and they seemed to be very, very happy about everything. And they sent a nice little note saying, "Oh, we're so pleased. You do know that people will crawl on this, right?" Yes, I believe we have taken that into account, and it should hold up just fine. So I want to tell you, I guess basically just a couple of stories is maybe the best way to walk through who we are and what we do and the process we do to get to making a finished diorama. The general steps across the board would be design, and sometimes we are involved from concept, literally from what do you think we should put in the space or how do you think we should tell this story visually. Other times we are just handed drawings and said this is exactly what we want to make. So design, from there we almost always do a rough scale maquette. It helps us work out all of our problems and deal with issues before they might arise. Particularly visually, we can draw things, or somebody can draw things that look really great from one angle in 2 dimensions. To me, it's much more interesting to figure out what do they look like from all angles. Can you get, if you want to look at it in terms of photo ops, can you get 4 or 5 just really fascinating views of the exact same thing? So you work on a detailed scale maquette in order to figure out those things and also work out the anatomy and the morphology and basically all the details and work through them in clay at a scale where when there's questions or comments or somebody either in our group or from the client would like something changed, it's a matter of minutes to make changes instead of what could be days. So we like to work things out on a small scale first and hopefully get everything approved at that point so then we move into a large scale fabrication. Everybody enjoys seeing photos all the way along, and there's not really a lot of comments until you get into surface textural detail and paint. So from there, we have to figure out the logistics. Now, this is the thing that I think most people don't think about when they think about people building dioramas. There are not a lot of people who build things from start to finish on site. I actually can't, unless it's a specific museum staff, somebody's building it outside of the space and bringing it in. So this is where all your limiting factors come in, because you have to build it, then you have to take it apart and bring it someplace, get it into the space, set it up. And because budget is always a concern, you can never work anywhere near as fast as you think you can on site. Literally, I forgot those screws. Well, how about if the 6 of us sit down while one of us runs to Home Depot for an hour? Things just go slow. So the logistics of how are we going to build this so we can run in and run out and be on site as fast as possible not only maximizes the budget, but it also makes everybody's lives easier, because as nice it is to travel to different places. We've been in San Diego a lot over this last year. That's fabulous. A week is great. Nobody wants to go and spend 3 weeks down there away from their families and away from all their prior commitments and everything and trying to work on site and get things done. So how quickly can we get in, get out, works best for the budget, works best for our crew, and also the clients seem to love us breezing in and breezing out, because no matter how pleasant and charming we are going to be an imposition. So then we get into constructing the diorama on the full scale, translation of 3D elements into full scale in foam. Then we tend to use fiberglass over the foam for structure, detail everything on the surface, and then the mural. And the murals are these magical things that allow the space to open up and get huge and tell tremendous amounts of the story that you could never tell in a small space. So we do murals, and then we put everything together, deal with lighting, deal with all the details, and then we start tearing it apart, figuring out how we're going to pack it up and ship it and bring it someplace. So if I'm going to give you an example from our last year of what I think is a very fabulous story of all the things that happened that are very, very unpredictable. We're working on a museum in Missouri, Museum of the Ozarks in Missouri, and the owner had seen a short-faced bear that we created for a sculpture of a short-faced bear we did for the Field Museum's traveling exhibit on mammoths and mastodons. And having found bones from a short-faced bear very close to the location of the museum, he was very excited and really wanted to tie these in. He's this wonderful man who's really just enthralled with what used to live here. Isn't it amazing these things lived here? Everyone should see these things. So he wanted it standing up. He wanted the full height. In the space, there was, well, we'll call it a skylight, but he has an opening between the entry level and then the lower level, which is the museum. And so one of our designers thought this was just a fabulous idea. We'll put the short-faced bear standing up, leaning on a tree trunk, downstairs. And upstairs, there'll be a very, very angry American jaguar up in a tree. And so you'll walk into the space, you'll see the jaguar. The jaguar's clearly looking down. You walk over to see what the jaguar's looking down at, and you're staring straight up into the face of these bears. And they're huge, and we thought this was going to be awesome. Unfortunately, well, we didn't care how it obstructed the views of the windows. We didn't care that he had a Columbian Mammoth fossil that he wanted to put in the upper level. You know, we know what we want to do. So he said, I love the idea, but I can't have it poking up into the main level. But I love the bear. I love the bear. You know, what else can you do for the bear? So the next thought was, well, what if the bear's wrestling down and killing a ground sloth, and it's something in the round then? Then you get to walk all the way around. It's this very dynamic sculpture, a lot of action. It's interesting from all views. We'll put it below the skylight so you can still look down and see what's going on. It's going to be great enticement for you to want to go down to the museum. He loved that as well, but where's the painting? Where's the diorama? Where's the mural? So then we thought, well, what if we do the same thing, but they're standing up? And it was going to be a shorter bear to make sure that his head wasn't peeking up too high. And the guy said that's great. I still want him standing all the way up. I want him up tall. And so we'd come, maybe he's chasing a bison. Maybe we kicked around all sorts of these really, really great ideas. And in the end, he's like, I really want him standing up tall. I mean, those things could be 12 feet tall. I wanted like that. That's amazing. I wanted to be as huge as they could have ever possibly been. And you have 10'6" ceilings. It's a little hard to his head will be poking up out of the thing, which I think would be a good thing, but he didn't want to obstruct the view. He didn't want anything up front. So his thought was, well, how about if we just move it into a different place, and we'll just put a hole in the floor for you. We'll just drop the diorama down by 3 feet. Then you don't have to worry about the height. So they ended up putting a very large 3-foot deep hole in the floor, and we built a diorama that you could then look down into, like you were looking down into the valley, and look up into, like you were looking up into the sky. So this was the way we were heading, and the storyline is that the short-faced bear, who would have been the apex predator of the day, from a distance can scent the fresh kill of a peccary that an American jaguar has killed and drugged to his cave. The short-faced bear doesn't need to hunt for food. Why hunt for food? He's just going to come take your lunch money. That's his job. So he's come and he's cornered this jaguar in the cave. So we love the storyline that this was. So we started to figure it out kind of in this very crude scale model. And as Captain Kirk often does, he came to visit to give us a sense of the scale and what you would see, and again, thinking in terms of, for lack of a better word, the photo op, what do you look like compared to this? This was kind of the way to go. So then that maquette gets cleaned up and turned into a very detailed, very accurate scale model. We drop that back in there to make sure that we like the way everything looks. We rearrange and position his arms so he's interesting from every direction. So mostly walking into and walking out of the gallery, you get a very, very great dramatic look, lots of action. On larger models, we've worked our way into scanning the model, turning it into a digital model, which is what you can see on the screen here. And then we take those models and we magically lay them out so we can slice them up using a standard CNC machine in 3-inch thick increments. So these pieces are all nested and laid out like a puzzle to get cut out like topography out of a 4-foot by 8-foot by 3-inch sheet of foam. And we cut a bunch of foam out, and then we assemble them like puzzles. We used to do all this work directly by hand into the foam, which we could still do, but the CNC machine, the scanning in the CNC machine is a different set of skills. It's not an easy process to do, but I think of it in terms of a table saw. I could build cabinets and go in back and use a carpenter saw, and I could saw all of my cut lists nice and straight, and it'd be very pretty, and it would take me forever. Or we could do something where we use a tool, the CNC machine, much like a table saw, where we can get multiple people involved and we can speed that process along. It gives us what is an accurate representation of the model without a lot of the sharp detail. So it's a great way to make a quick step forward, but it doesn't cut out the detailed artwork. It still needs to go back into by hand and clean everything up, and when you sculpt something 12 inches high and turn it into 12 feet high, there's a lot of tiny little mistakes that become very, very large mistakes, and you need to change those things along the way. So while that process is underway, the diorama shell starts to get built in the shop. And this is all 1-inch tube steel welded together, and it's been devised in parts so it can come apart in pieces to fit out our door, fit onto a truck, in this case, no more than a 20-foot straight truck, because the museum is in an area where you cannot get a full-size semi into, so everything needs to break into much smaller parts. And in the case of this specific museum, it needs to walk through the front door and go over a very finished, very beautiful, very cherry railing and get dropped down through a hole in the floor, the skylight. That's the only real entrance that is not 3 feet wide by 6'8" tall, a standard doorway. So if we want to get sizes of any pieces in here, and it's a 12-foot diameter, half a 12-foot diameter circle. So we can pick them up, carry them through the finished upper level past priceless fossils and past very expensive woodwork, and lift them over and drop them through a hole to catch on the bottom part. This is why I say weight is actually a very, very serious issue to think about, because in our shop we don't have forklifts. Everything gets moved around by hand. When we go to museums, very rarely do we get to use forklifts. Sometimes a genie lift or a scissors lift so we can reach things high, but certainly not anything to lift with. So everything we do is very, very handmade, hand-moved, everything by hand. So once we're starting to get these pieces together in foam, we're dropping them inside the diorama. I would love to just point out the size of these things that we're looking at. And then you can see the rock work starting to take shape on the ground and up against the back wall. And in order to make these dioramas work, dioramas have got cove ceilings, in this case a cove ceiling and a coved floor, because nothing wrecks the view of endless perspective like seeing a seam or a shadow or where the ceiling meets the floor. Lighting also becomes a very, very large issue, especially when they're in very, very confined spaces. So for the size of objects that are fitting into this diorama, there is 6 inches between the back of the bear's foot and the wall, and there's roughly less than a foot between the pieces in front and the glass in front. So we're working on pretty tight parameters and worrying about shadows. Once things are done in foam, we use fiberglass over the top to encase them and make them fire retardant, structurally sound, and a substrate that we can start to add sculpting epoxy onto. So you'll see the guys in the back there, that rock is starting to look like rock. And the cave ceiling is a piece that people need to be able to just pick up, lift above their head, and screw in from the inside. Moving back to the bear, if you're doing taxidermy, you can get a taxidermy form in foam. You can order it ahead of time, and then you order life casts of a nose and a mouth and a tongue and teeth. They don't have those for short-faced bears. So those were sculpted ahead of time in clay, molds were made, and then they were cast. And then came the very tedious task of adding hair. And this is one of the very first things we tried this on because we had a client who was quite willing to put things behind glass. So a lot of the time when you see fake fur added to a sculpture, it looks like fake fur added to a sculpture. It very much looks like a very large Muppet. This was a very slow way of getting around how to make fur, actual fur, and this is in this case Cadacia goat hair that's being added to this. How to add it and make it look real. And a lot of trial, a lot of error, and in the end the answer is one very tiny little pinchful at a time. And basically layering it on like shingles and following the growth patterns of typical hair. And Jim was using contemporary bears as reference points. But it is, a lot of what we do, there's no magic to it. It is talent and patience. The same thing happens with the rock. We're sculpting rock. We're taking casts of pieces and adding them to the face and starting to make the rock look like rock. Setting things in place and making sure that the ground form underneath matches what we want it to match to make sure that these animals are sitting correctly, that they really have a good sense of weight, a sense of drama. You'll see sometimes, whether it's taxidermy or sculpture, if it's not really harmonious with the environment that it's engaged with, it ends up, no matter how good it is, immediately looking false. Because it's hard to believe that that animal has got weight on that appendage, on that form that it's sitting on when its paw isn't fully resting on there. So there's the peccary, nearly done. And everything is just starting to come together. So we've hit a point now where the shell has been assembled and the animals are well underway and the ground form is all blocked in and being worked on. So now it's all about the mural. So a sketch is done to lay out the valley below, because the trick with this is you're looking up and down, and it has to work both ways. And then from that sketch, a gradation is rolled out, and it's as simple as starting to paint it on. If you sit where I sit, it's a fabulous thing to come out and watch this unfold and realize that you'll never be able to paint again, ever. So I think the full total of time was over 7 weeks worth of putting hair on the bear. And then we moved into the jaguar. And once the hair was on the jaguar, got himself a little trim. Jim's dad is a barber, so that was very handy. And then details are added. The bear was done with all sorts of, we dyed the hair to get it all to the right color and then use the appropriate color and did the gradation that way. You can't do that with spots, so the spots were painted on. And the rock work is tied together and the rock work's painted. And then you've got a very, very lovely American jaguar. And I think a lot of it is all about the little details, so the whiskers and the details around the eyes. And I know these are a bit repetitive, but it's been a year, and I still love looking at these photos. And the bear would never look ferocious enough without spit. So if you're putting sculptures into a very confined space, and you've got light sources, we put lights coming up from the bottom, we've got lights coming up from the top. It's a very, very large bear. There's ambient light coming through the glass in front too. So what do? How do you get rid of a shadow? There's always going to be a shadow, and as soon as a shadow hits the wall, it suddenly becomes a wall. It's no longer a vast open space. So the answer is your sculpture becomes a light fixture. And so there's a lot of indirect lights on the back. There's a frosted piece of smoked glass across the back. Anything to add some diffused light to negate the shadows that it was putting onto the walls. And in some cases where you simply can't do them, you get the lighting correct, and then you go in there and you start to paint the shadows out by compensating, by painting those areas lighter. So the explanation of it makes it sound, the explanation is very, very simple. It's obviously very, very difficult to do. And I'm lucky enough to work with insanely talented people. And like I said, it has allowed me the opportunity to realize that I will never actually get to paint a mural ever. because I would never be able to get up to that level. Little bursts of color, so we start adding, making fake vines and little fake ferns and adding moss. I think that those little delicate details bring a lot of extra life, bring a lot of ambiance, bring splashes of color, but mostly I think they make the rock feel much more like rock when it has something small and delicate to be contrasted to. All right, so now here's when it starts to get fun with the mural. Beth's hand is nearly touching the wall. Eric is standing likely a foot away from the wall, but it looks like it just goes back. And when you get up close, the brush strokes are kind of loose. But when you start to back away, there's a lot of ambiance and a lot of depth. And in the end, it's hard to believe that that's a curved wall that they're almost hitting with their knees in this photo. So then we take all the pieces and parts, put it all together, and it's starting to look remarkably like what we hoped it would look like from the rough maquettes that we made. These are kind of, those photos represent almost the identical shots taken of the clay model. Now it's the logistics end of things. If you look on the ground, you can start to see where the ground form is split apart. And it's split apart in parts that follow cracks in the rocks, that follow root lines, that do anything to make it so when we bring those pieces in, we put them together, there's as little to seam, as little to cover, as little time on site as possible, because time equals money, money comes out of the budget. Our whole goal is basically breaking down to how much stuff can we possibly make for your budget. So if we can limit our time on site, it just means we get to add more to the diorama. Now, everything has to get passed through a hole for this specific job. That's a very, very large bear. And we've made a little mock-up of the hole, and we've taken our little scale model of the bear, and we've realized it barely, fits through the hole. But moreover, it makes it much more difficult when you realize, well, you can't touch it. The fur looks great. It's not durable. You can't wrap your arms around it. You'll start pulling fur right out of it. So we have to ship it in custom steel frame crates that we make. It has to have handlebars attached to it for ways to pick it up, to pass it around. And then because we're moving into what is a construction site, we need to keep them as dust-free as possible because they're still doing sheetrock in this area, and sheetrock dust will never, ever, ever come out of anything, ever. And these are just fun for watching it come apart, all of that depth from that mural just breaking down into flat panels. And you've seen from the photos, it's a fairly sizable diorama, but when it comes into parts, it literally fills our shop. So then we show up on site, and we need to drop it through that hole. 350-pound bear, all of that steel, all of those walls, everything is extremely delicate. You have to be careful how you catch it, how you hold it, how you put it together, because every little ding and dent equals a tremendous amount of touch-up time on site. So slowly we get everything in, and we start assembling it into the pit on site. And you'll see there's a bunch of, you can see where we had to spackle the seams because of the damage that came when we pulled it apart. So a lot of touch-up paint and trying to figure out how you make a cave roof look like it's going to, like it doesn't just die into the ceiling. As far as the logistical constraints go, this all went together extremely well. It was very well thought out by the group. It worked really great. But one of my favorite install shots of all time is this picture of Pat and Jeff. There they are. See how the diorama is almost touching the ceiling? It is a Pat and Jeff thickness away from touching the ceilings. So when we had a scissors lift in our shop and we could stand around and walk around on this, we could assemble things, we could tie it, we could do whatever we wanted to. In this space, we gave ourselves, well, not enough space for me to fit in there, but there are thinner people who work with us, so they were able to shimmy up and bolt all the pieces and parts together. So this finished piece, at the time, was probably the single greatest thing that I've ever been allowed to be involved with. We were so proud. We actually, we had the guy who was heading up the design, the lead design on this, and had started painting the mural, had gotten sick and passed away partway through this process. And we're a very small group of people who work very close together. We're very close friends. And it was devastating. And he was about halfway through when he passed away. After this was all done, we ended up having a memorial party at our shop, and his whole family came and everything. And this was the last thing Jeff had dreamed about. And I really thought we finished it up and did him proud. We thought it was great. The client wasn't on site when we installed it. We left. Everybody was just on an extreme high. Look what we grew up to be. So Saturday morning, I get a call from the client, and he said, I'm sorry I missed you. I went to the museum as soon as I got back in town. It is so awesome. It is so awesome. Can you please tell everybody how appreciative I am, how proud I am of them, how much we love the work you do for us. It's just, that bear's the greatest thing ever. It's just awesome. And then he called me Sunday morning. He said, I stepped down into the diorama. Man, when you step down on the ground and you see that bear, oh, man, that thing is awesome. Oh, that thing is so awesome. And they called me Monday morning and said, you got to come and move the bear. Now, this is a finished piece of artwork, and it's not meant to be disassembled, and it doesn't come apart. It wasn't built to come apart. It's not a traveling exhibit. Moreover, it's intensely personal, and we're very proud of it, and we don't want to undo what we've done. But he said, wouldn't that bear be awesome if it was right below that skylight? What if people could walk right up next to it? What if people could see it right there? What if you could walk all the way around it, but if it were standing up? Man, wouldn't that be? That's the experience I want him to have. And, we had thought that early along, and it was part of his rationale as well. It actually, maybe the major reason that it got moved away from the skylight was because this museum was going to start to move chronologically, and so you'd be into Native American artifacts by that point, and this wasn't going to make any sense back there anyway. But he's like, wouldn't that be great? I really want it back there. Basically, can you please come down and saw your diorama apart, rip a bear out, and move him? Now, if you remember, the bear was a light fixture. The bear was not meant to be viewed in the round, so that was going to entail us coming down, hacking a hole in the back of the diorama, taking the bear out, figuring out how to pass him up where gravity is not your friend, through the hole, getting him back, rebuilding him, and figuring out what kind of ground form to put him on so that people would walk up to him. So we did that. So the idea was he's great on his own, but he needs to be interacting with something. And we're going to be getting into Native American cultures in the museum by the time we get around this far. Wouldn't it be great? And a lot of these concepts for the museum have involved predator-prey relationships. And wouldn't it be great if there was a Clovis hunter that maybe had killed the peccary instead, and the bear was charging the Clovis hunter. So suddenly the hunter becomes the hunted. We want to put him in a place where he's in a very precarious position. It seems obvious he's going to be killed, but then again, is he? Would that be? How do we balance him on that thing to add all that tension, that drama for the viewer? That would be great. When you're upstairs, when you're walking up, this is what you'd see. The front of that big cherry railing, the front end of it is glass, so you'd be able to see him as you're walking into the museum. And then when you look over the edge, you look straight down into that hunter's face. That would be awesome. So suddenly we were very upset, and we started to this will actually be great. Let's do that. So we pull him out, bring him back to the shop, mock up that skylight opening overhead, finish him up all the way around, make a ground form that matches the model. And this, when you're downstairs, when you walk into the gallery, as soon as you walk through the door of that specific gallery, this is what you walk right into. So the idea was to move this along as fast as possible. So we went down with the ground form and the bear and got down there as soon as possible. And then the hunter was kind of like phase 2, because it still feels fairly finished without the hunter. So that's what we'll do. Now the problem came after the bear was done. We have a diorama with a jaguar and a peccary and nothing. Isn't he angry at the air? So the thought was, well, what if he's gone down into the stream and there's a bunch of prehistoric moose down. He's taken a moose cabin. He's hauled that up, and now a stag moose has chased him up the hill, and it's pushing it. but it's a lot of drama. And we thought, oh, wouldn't this be great? And even when we presented it, we thought, wouldn't this be great? But it's very theatrical. It's real semantic. It's got a lot of drama. It sounded great. And then our friend Bruce Erickson from the Science Museum stopped over, and we showed him this drawing, and he said, "You guys are ridiculous. Like, that's just so unplausible. It would never. It wouldn't be the male. It might be the female. Even that, they're not going to chase it up a hill. Even that, they're never going to go after a cornered jaguar like that. That'll never happen. So." What if the jaguar, or I mean, what if the stag moose is just coming by? Wouldn't, I mean, if that thing's in a cave quietly and this passes by, even something this large would be horribly frightened. And what if we could turn its head? What if you could see the white of its eye? Wouldn't that be fascinating? So we did this rough maquette, like, hey, what do you think of that? And the guy says, yeah, that'd be great. We should do that. So then we made one of those. And the thing about this is, as we've gone through these series of animal sculptures, I'm very proud of everything we've done, but it kind of seems like whatever we did last is just that little bit better, a little bit better. I really thought that jaguar was amazing. This, I thought, looked like it was just going to start walking at any second. This currently is maybe my favorite thing ever. And it's beautiful on its own, but you really got to get a sense of scale, because it's huge. And when you get up close to it, there's a tremendous amount of detail. So now we're to the logistics. You've seen the size of this thing. And if you remember the hole that everything has to go through to get in the museum, now has a bear below it. So nothing goes through the hole. That's done. So what do you got? Well, we've got service doors. We've got 3 foot wide by 6'8" tall doorways, and to make matters worse, they're archways and they're 2 feet deep. So you can't simply walk. If you wanted to take something too large, pass a foot through and then tip it up and walk through this way, you don't have that option. It's got to slide through directly. So of course, you figure out how to chop it in pieces. You figure out how to make handles for it. So the moose broke down into 5 pieces: 2 antlers, 2 body halves, and a head. And again, was done in a fashion so that it could be reassembled on site virtually seamlessly when it goes together. There was no touch-up on him at all. Everything's sleeved together, and we brushed over the hair, and nothing to be seen. But you can do the math, and you can make the models, and you can figure everything out, and you can say, this is going to fit. It's going to be tight, but this is going to fit. Well, I can do the math wrong, and I can show up on site, and it turns out that we can fit the half laying on the ground, which is the taller half. We can fit that through the doorway if and only if we take him, we take the braces off that keeps him from touching the floor, because the hair is very fragile and you can't grab it by the hair. You're grabbing it by the hooves and by the handles we put in it. Well, we can take him off everything. We can lay him hair first on his back, on his shoulder hump, lay him on the floor, where I promised Jim we wouldn't, and we can slide him through the doorway. And if myself, with my not insubstantial weight, hangs from the leg, I can flex that fiberglass just enough that will only kind of damage the doorway getting it through. But we'll get it through, and we won't have to cut the leg off, which means we won't have to be there for 3 extra days. So it's squeezed in place, and it is now currently my favorite thing we've ever done. The storyline obviously has changed, and now it's really just about kind of the megafauna of the day. Gigantic animals, and the client was very captivated by things that are familiar yet completely unfamiliar, because it's a jaguar, but it's in Missouri, and it's huge. It's 9.5 feet long, and it's a 12.5 foot tall stag moose. We also had the difficulty of trying to figure out how to build something off-site that's an organic shape, that's going to be sitting on a very sloped organic ground form, and make sure that it fit in the space. And at the last minute, we upped the scale of the maquette a little bit, because I thought, if when you looked at it, its antlers were kind of visually cut off by the window, it would really add a massive sense of size to him. to not have him down low, but to have him up as high as he could be and have him be crowding the window. That'd be great. And I did not tell the client, but I did not sleep for the 2 weeks before we went down there because I woke up every night. It's not going to fit. It's not going to fit. It's not going to fit. And I was thrilled to find out that it fits with at least 3/8 of an inch to spare. So it was a very good first day of install when we unloaded everything, walked that in, set it up, and walked away at the end of the night thinking, well, we can go to the bar now. And then in the space, the lighting's gotten a little dimmer, so it's much, much more dramatic than it was in the shop. So then, what about the hunter? Well, look. When you've got an organic, slopey ground form, and he's falling back into roots from a fallen tree, how do you make that off-site and make him fit, make him feel like he's there? The fallen tree, the root system in the back actually kind of also works as a fence, as a barrier to keep people away. You can see through it, but it'll keep you from touching the guy because the guy's going to be incredibly fragile. So, of course, the easiest thing to do is to grab Mark and say, hey, pretend like you're falling back, and Pat will catch you, and then we'll scan your body, and we'll try that. So there's Mark in foam with his bunched up shorts. And then the face, the head is being sculpted in clay. And then we started to clothe, we fiberglassed the body and started to clothe it. Now, when I said we have the luxury of not being the experts on content, when it comes to how would a Clovis hunter in the Ozarks be dressed, it's nice when it turns out that you've met a guy and becomes friend with the man who literally wrote the book on ancient Ozark cultures by Michael O'Brien. Just call Michael O'Brien and ask him. So we get a lot of our information. You read papers, you find stuff on the web, you get everything put together, you assemble what you think your best educated guess is, and then you get to present that to somebody who is actually the authority on this. And they will tell you, yes, do this, no, don't do that, I think you could do that, that seems reasonable, this might be pushing it a little far. So we used a bunch of different hides, and we started to clothe them. And then we took Patrick's hands and life cast his hands and read up on how they would make spears and made a replica spear. The Clovis point is actually one. It's a casting from an actual one they found very near the site. So that's kind of a fun tie-in. The head was finished off in clay, molded, cast in silicone, and is currently freshly painted and awaiting hair plugging tomorrow. So I came a little early. He has no eyebrows. He has no beard. He has no long hair. But it's kind of heading that way. So that's there's kind of a walk through. Hey, I love your first idea for a diorama. Why don't you make that? And it turns into two separate ones, none of which were what you originally intended, but you split the players up and got them remarried. The whole process, no matter what we do, it really does break down to very similar steps. So scale maquette that gets scrutinized and tweaked and approved. In this case, this is the Columbian Mammoth maquette we did for the Field Museum's Mammoths and Mastodons exhibit. And you get it all dialed in, and everybody loves it, and then you get to send that off, the photos of that off to Dan Fisher. Somebody who I didn't get to talk to directly, but literally the leading expert in the country on mammoths and mastodons. So then he comes through and says, I don't think you'd see the toenails, and he explains why. And so you get to tweak your work and kind of feel in the end that this is in fact probably the most accurate depiction of a Columbian mammoth currently from what everybody knows. So this is a whole different set of problems because it's touchable by the public and because it travels. So every 4 months, it gets disassembled by strangers, put on trucks, and reassembled. So the detail is all there, but then you have to devise a way that someone who's not you, in a space that you're not familiar with, that may or may not have lifts, how does this come apart? How do you do it so you don't see the seams? With the mammoth, There's a lot of skin folds, a lot of creases, a lot of good places to hide seams. When this is assembled, literally you can't find where the seams are even from 2 feet away. But we also, in our past, before we were doing specifically museums, visitor centers, and zoos, we did a little bit of trade show work, we did a little bit of retail work, we did a little bit of everything. And from trade show work, we learned that people just, when things travel, they lose hardware. They lose hardware everywhere, and this thing's going to travel internationally. Gosh, fellas, how do you avoid that? Well, somebody like me says, it's easy. It'll all be cleats, sleeves, and magnets. Don't you worry about it. And then you walk back into the shop and you tell the guys, I told them we would just use cleats, sleeves, and magnets. And then they all yell at you and tell you what a moron you are and how you're, promising things that they don't know how to do. Yeah. But this group of folks, they figured it out on the fly. The tusks sleeve out, but only if you pull at exactly the right angle. They're held in with immensely strong magnets, so they require quite a good tug in order to get them to pop off. But if you don't tug on them in exactly the right direction, you can climb up and sit on them. So those sleeve out, the body is held on just with cleats. So you just simply, look, just pull the tail out. The head is the only thing that has hardware in it. There's 4 bolt holes, and it's just simply because it's a little unruly and big, and we wanted to make sure that it lined up exactly. So there are 4 bolts in there, but you could climb to the inside and do that. But it does get to be fairly interesting as it starts to come apart. So it's held up with pegs, and again, because we do everything by hand, it had to be something that just any 5 guys in the shop could pick the parts up and move them around. So everything was hollowed out. There is a steel armature in there, but only as parts that hold it together. It doesn't necessarily go all the way to the ground. So you end up with parts that you pop off and just sleeve those legs off and start to load them up on carts. So this show, everything it had, it has steel frame carts and pieces just sleeve and lock into exactly where they're supposed to. And to the best of my knowledge, it has been traveling for 4 years now without any phone calls. So we must have done all right on that. Shorter examples of somebody who saw that and wanted one just like it, but they wanted outside in a public park right next to the Children's Museum in San Jose. At least San Jose, that's pretty much like being inside. But this is, you have to deal with structural engineering, you have to deal with getting things signed off, you have to deal with seismic activity. So this has a tremendous amount of steel running through it, and it's extremely heavy. So now we're making something that we need to move around with a chain hoist in our shop, lift it up and set it down with a chain hoist onto carts that we can then roll off with pallet jacks, because then we need to get a serious company to come and, take the pieces and parts off. So the body was all one piece. It had large eye hooks built into the top, so they could pick it up, set it down on the ground. We could sleeve the legs in place, put pins on them. Then they picked that whole fella up. Yeah, well, no, I wanted magnets, and they were like, no, don't use magnets. Yeah. And so he stands outside, and again, we had it fully assembled in our shop, and they were like, this is great. It's unprotected, right? You know that, right? I mean, people will probably try to climb it. Like, don't you worry about a thing. That'll hold up just fine. So, I don't know. So there's little fun, entertaining stories from around the shop. I have gobs of other photos of, similar type work. That's also very awesome, and all has stories all in its own way. So these, the last couple, this short-faced bear, this is the one from the Field Museum, and this is all sculpted fur because it's all touchable and travelable. The same thing with the Homotherium. It's sculpted fur with the exception of the whiskers and little tufts on its jowls and little tufts on the tips of his ears that kind of really add a lot and help you believe that sculpted surface that you could bounce a hammer off is actually soft to the touch. More Ethereum. And then, like I said, the murals are what make these dioramas really, really effective to tell a story, to give a sense of space, but mostly because the terror bird that sat inside this diorama, its foot hit the wall and its beak nearly hit the glass. It's just, there's no reason why it should ever fit in there, but it looks very lovely in place. And we couldn't fit horses in, so you have to paint those into the backdrop. Well, so there's a little snapshot of who we are and what we do.
Great. Thank you so much, Tim. And we do have time for question and answer. And I just wanted to say, because I didn't say this during the introduction, that it was about a year ago, I think, that Don, our curator of exhibits, who's been mentioned many times tonight, invited me to go down and visit with Tim in his shop because they were working on some pieces for the bell. And I walked in there and felt like I had walked into my ultimate, like, it was my equivalent of Disney World, I think, which probably I imagine other people that work there have had that feeling as well, or maybe you do yourself. It blew my mind. And that short-nosed bear that went into the diorama with the Clovis man was standing in the middle of the room. Most of the goat fur had been applied. It was about 14 feet tall because it was up on its stand, I think.
It's up on about a 2 foot
Okay.
riser. Add a little to his immensity and then get him a little more out of reach. I think this specific museum, the visitors are going to more than likely be very, very respectful.
Yeah.
So we aren't too worried. But, you know, get that rear end just a little higher, a little better for everybody.
That makes sense. We actually have a Kodiak bear in our touch and see room. Not to digress too much, but all the kids come into the touch and see room, and where the fur is the thinnest is right on the rump, because all the kids come in and like pat the butt of the bear.
Who's a good bear?
Exactly. But I just wanted to say, when I saw the short-faced bear, like, I remember my heart beating faster. I mean, it was just this totally visceral reaction. It was just amazing. I took a gazillion pictures with their permission, of course, to post all over everything, and it was like, oh my God, you gotta see this. Anyway,
I will tell you, and I'm not kidding. I have that reaction most days. My job is, like everybody else's, my job is hard, and it's tremendously stressful at times, but it's unbelievably rewarding. The amount of times, specifically this last year, that we've been around as a group, and you just kind of look at everybody and say, did you ever think we would get to grow up to be these guys? You know, the people would allow us the opportunity to just really, the guy in the client in Missouri just flat out said, all right, buddy, swing for the fences. You don't get those opportunities, and if you got a group of people who are willing to, fall on their face as many times as it takes, okay, I'll stay late tonight. Okay, I'll fix that on Saturday, because everybody wants to make this. They need to get paid, but I don't think that's why anybody works in our building.
it seemed that way when we were there. And I'd love to let other people ask some questions if they have some.
I assume I was so comprehensive.
Yeah, I got one from Don and one from Jean. 1 second here.
I'd just like to say, when I came in and visited Tim that day, and I don't think you were in your office. They were going looking for you, but they brought me into your office, and there was this dead peccary laying on your desk with blood dripping. And now I work at a museum. Sometimes we do have dead animals laying on the table. And it really looked like it was a real dead peccary on the desk.
That's fantastic.
I just regret not taking a picture of you with the dead peccary on your desk.
I have literally 30,000, 40,000 photos that I didn't put in here. But I have multiple times sent the photo of me on the phone with the dead peccary laying on my desk. But when the client said, you know, well, how do you go about making how'd you go about making the peccary? Because that was the first animal we finished. I ran outside and I threw it across the hood of my car, and he's kind of draped. Like, tagged him on the way to work. Oh, it's yours. Yeah.
Question right here.
So the story about getting that exhibit completely installed, and they were so thrilled with it, and you were feeling proud and satisfied. And then he called and said, "Nope, you got to come and move it."
Yeah.
What happened to the budget?
Well, it is client discretionary, I guess. You know, when I mean I've been doing this for 25 years, and it doesn't matter what we do, where it goes, whatever it is insanely difficult for me to separate what we do and the cost that I can figure it out on paper. I understand why it costs what it costs. I'm fine with what it costs. I there's not apologies there. It's enough to, there's people, there's buildings, there's insurance, there's all this stuff, and nobody really makes a ton of money doing it. So I mean, this is what things break down to. But I still look at them and think like, well, I wouldn't buy one of those for my house. I mean, it's really difficult to disassociate your own personal checkbook from work. And so I'm very, very wary of budgets all the time. And I'm very open and outspoken about things. And I started talking about what it would take to move that bear. We could make you a different bear or a different, we could probably make you two different things because of the logistics of it. It's not like it's in our shop and just before it left we changed our mind. It's there and it's a lot of work and we got to tear it out, we got to bring it back, and we did put more work into it than if we would have just made a second one. But I think everybody can kind of like basically this is a privately owned museum, and so I think you can walk through your house and look at things that, well, maybe you'd think that was a crazy amount to spend on the chair, but I love that chair. And it really just boils down to that, for whether it's for a person or it's for an organization. When we talk about budgets with people, I really, and we just went through this at we worked with the Science Museum of Minnesota and did a very large job with the San Diego Natural History Museum. It's called Coast to Cactus, and it'll be open after the first of the year. And it's environments, different habitats, starting at the ocean and working your way up into the high desert. They use a lot of taxidermy in there, which was sad for us because we really wanted to do a lot of the large animal sculpts. But they use taxidermy, which is great. But we did a lot of custom plant work. And there is nothing more expensive, basically per square inch, than making plant models. They're incredibly expensive. And I'm sorry I don't have access to everything on my computer. Ocotillos, we made an Ocotillo plant, which literally has got over 100,000 little leaves that there just was no existing fake leaf to use. You simply have to find something close and then cut them all by hand and glue them together in groups of threes and stick each group of three on. I mean, why it could employ a high school girl and some of her friends all summer to do things like that. And so you look at the cost, and literally we did a plant that took exactly the same amount of hours as the traveling Columbian Mammoth for the Field Museum, and it's a plant. But it was very, very important to their story. So when we started breaking down their budget, they gave me they did the design work, and they gave us the list of the species they wanted, and we started itemizing and doing all the math and trying to figure out. I mean, if you want to know the hardest part, the absolute, without a doubt, the largest art form in my company is estimating. How long will it take to make a mammoth? Quick. I need an answer. We need a proposal tomorrow. And don't worry if you're wrong, because if it's too high, you'll never get the job, and if it's too low, you'll basically end up doing it and paying the museum to do it. So that's why I said my job ends up being fairly stressful from time to time. But I ask people with things like that, I do not want to send you an itemized breakdown of a list, because you know what your goals are, you know what your objectives are, you know the story you want to tell. So does this budget number work with your story? Whether it's plant models in a diorama or if it's, I really, really want that specific bear. I want that bear over here. Then it just boils down to whether it's a group or a grant or a museum or a company, whoever's funding it. It's for them to say, this is, yes, doing that is worth it to me. So yeah, there's a lot of times where I think we do things that I look and I say, man, that ended up being just like a steal, for what I'm. I look at things that we do and I think that's a lot of bang for their buck. Good, good on that one. And then other pieces I look at, a lot of plant models, and I do say like, wow, you could buy a car, but a car isn't going to tell their story.
I have two questions. The first one would be, is there any ongoing maintenance schedule or anything like that, especially for the more interactive or walk-through ones? Mm-hmm. And second off, I'm a technical director of computer animation, so when I saw you using 3D for the CNC cutouts and all of that kind of stuff, I was curious, do you use, or would you be considering for future projects doing things where you would do either a 3D sculpt, or do you use lighting on your model in 3D to explore how you would remove those shadows from the back wall or things like that? To what level do you prototype your lighting setup or other factors within 3D?
Okay, I think the answer to both of those questions is kind of the same answer. We spend a lot of time trying to be all things to all people, because I'm not a sales guy, because I don't want my job to be out trying to look for work or whatever. So we used to do basically whatever walked through the front door when someone called and said they needed something. And a lot of that included, there's this entire scope of work and a turntable that needs to rotate with this, 2,000 pounds offset, whatever. And earlier, I think we used to look at things and say, oh, look what a great job we did on this and this and this. How hard could a mechanized turntable be? We're not turntable guys. And what you need to do is you need to get your butt kicked a whole number of times and start to realize this is what we do and what we don't do. So the answer to your question on ongoing maintenance is the touchable sculptures and things. Occasionally, the San Diego Zoo, which is absolutely the most volatile environment in the history of the world, they share a lawn with the Natural History Museum, and just coincidentally, we do work for both of them. We've done touchable animal sculptures for both of them. We have things in the museum that are 8 years old, and occasionally, every couple of years, they repaint the nose. The stuff in the zoo, and the way the people at the zoo described to me, was that, it's the same people. They go to the zoo, and they behave like people. Or they go to the museum and they behave like they're in a museum, and then they come across the lawn and they behave like animals. So we've done some maintenance work out there where they have thoroughly abused things, but really, this stuff. I mean, when you start to define this is who we are and what we do, I like when. Maybe a better way to put this is I have friends who are pilots. I have friends who are police officers. I have friends who are doctors, friends who are nurses. When everything goes wrong at my job, everything goes wrong, we repaint it. So every once in a while, maintenance for us, for the last, I would say, 5 years, since we stopped trying to be people who I don't think we would ever grow up to be, is touch-up, paint. Somebody, if you kick at it hard enough, or if you pick up a rock and carve your name in it, our stuff is tough, but, there's limits. And so we can go touch up. But for the most part, maintenance tends to be the client cleaning, and that's about it. And when we get into other issues like mechanized things and interactives, we tend to look. There are other people who are awesome at that, and we like to find them and let them do what they do, and we do what we do. When it comes to prototyping, again, we know who we are and we know what we do really well. Technology, when you take it and introduce it into people who are good at portions of it, If we use the portions that we're good at, great, we do that. But as far as creating computer models to show everything and figure everything out, we have gotten so good at the maquettes and are so speedy at mocking things up and moving things around just physically that right now I don't see that being an advantage to us, so we haven't tried to evolve into that yet, and that might change. We have produced some things from people have given us computer models of sculptural elements that we've produced, and then we end up tweaking them in the end anyway. Because again, when you're looking at something on a screen and then you blow it up to be 10 feet tall, there's just different sorts of things that are different, so we tweak those.
Sure. Yeah, I was wondering if you could suggest some places we could see your work, and then also I was curious if you were involved with the North Dakota Heritage Center that just opened in Bismarck.
We haven't been involved with North Dakota. We have stuff at the Science Museum and the Historical Society and a handful of Historical Society locations, some visitor centers around nature centers around the cities and things. There's a few that we're starting work on this year. I think that we have grown and evolved so rapidly over the last 5 years that if I want to show off what we do, it hasn't been really much around here recently. But we have things at Maplewood Nature Center, and we're working with Harriet Alexander Nature Center in Roseville right now. Hopefully we did a large design project for Quarry Hill Nature Center in Rochester, and if funding goes through for that and we get chosen to do the work, that's going to be stunning. Everything we've got we did a lot of stuff at the History Center. Weather permitting, we did 1 billion years ago. The Greatest Generation at the Historical Society we did years ago. We did parts of the newest gallery, the Minnesota Heritage Gallery, and I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head. So we've done bits and pieces there. I think our showiest stuff it's the stuff we worked on in the last few years. I kind of think that everything just keeps amping up and is better than what we've done before. So the last few years, these photos are from the Biomuseo in Panama, and this was a design that was loosely given to us. We tightened up the design, but it was somebody else's concept and placement of all the animals. We kind of worked out the kinks in the composition and made all the animals anatomically correct and everything. But this is 67 animals and 30 bird sculptures that went into a Frank Gehry building in Panama City. And that's quite, and you should go there. That one I think is really spectacular, just in the scope and the variety and everything. I thought that was really wonderful. And then, whenever this museum in the Ozarks gets opened up, the target kind of keeps moving on it. But I do think that that's the best work we've ever done. My favorite things that we've ever done always boil down to the things that there are 16 full-time people at the shop, including myself, and there's usually a couple freelance people who come and go. Any project that involves the entire group is always the strongest that we get because it's got a lot of variety in it, and everybody is an expert at some part of it. So whether it's the sculpture, the painting, the engineering, the metalwork, even down to the fiberglassing, every step we do has gotten to the point where it's all a art process to get through it. So go to San Diego. There's lots of great stuff there too. But yeah, locally, there's some stuff at the Science Museum and at the History Center are probably the largest things we've done.
This is a kind of specific question that I want to introduce you to something. Speaking of, have you any work in town to see? More work in town to see. It would be good to give an opportunity for this, but we have a business in Northeast where we're doing a visitor center for food production.
Okay.
So this looks like animal focused. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've...
it's animal focused for this...
time.
For
now.
For tonight.
So far. Oh, okay.
The variety of what we do, clearly, everyone in our group is ADD.
Okay.
And it's not, not even as a joke. It is
nobody on this end of the microphone.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
No, but the creative process
sorry,
you have.
shiny.
The creative process you have to be ADD.
Yeah.
There's kind of how you gather info.
Yeah, but it's what makes our job so interesting in that we get we are at least now, we are fortunate enough to steer ourselves through the type of work we like to do, and it's really great to come off of something that is filled with animals.
Yeah.
And then the next thing is very, very, it's a lot of cabinetry and metalwork and very geometric. And so we do a little bit of everything.
Because my question is, for example, if we were to do animals, because there are cows and pigs that would be involved, do you do a less fancy version, like if it wanted to be on the roof of the building, that kind of level?
Yeah. I think there's a sliding scale.
Yeah.
I have no. I don't. I mean it in terms of if somebody is trying to think of the best. If somebody can get a foot away from something and see it all the way around, it's very different than if they're 5 feet away and it's behind glass. The back side of that bear that you saw is a light fixture. Before it was a light fixture, it was just unfinished because no one saw it. If it was 50 feet away, we would treat it differently. It's purely budgetary.
So animals 2 stories up wouldn't be in the category of turntables where you say, call someone else.
No.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you.
I have a card. Look at that. That's as close to sales as I ever get. Good for me.
A card and a website.
I do. Our website is frightfully out of date. It's very fun. I think the field is on there. I think we did the website right after the field. And literally nothing else you saw is on there. Yeah, nothing has been updated in 2.5 years.
Oh, okay.
So this is our big thing. The whole goal was to have a very slow December because it's been a very crazy year. And so do some house cleaning and tweaking some stuff, and then we were totally before Christmas going to redo our website because I wanted to roll out basically, hey, you should check out our new website. There isn't one thing on there that you've seen before, and so I guess procrastination and laziness has a huge payoff in that you get to say, check this out, and it'll be a pretty big unveiling.
And I could give some context too to why we're seeing so many animals. Not only are they so charismatic to look at, but also again when we were there. Looking at the short-faced bear and at the American jaguar and all this. But it was really when we were in your office afterwards and you were showing the pictures of the Columbian mammoth being taken apart. And it was the sections being held by magnets and then that standing pair of front forelegs. And it just blew my mind. It was so very surreal and abstract.
Yeah.
And that was sort of what gave birth to this idea. We gotta get in here and talk about. And I went with mammoths because that was the thing that had stuck with me. Of course, many of you were here last month to hear our expert from the University of Minnesota talk about mammoths and mastodons in late Pleistocene climates, et cetera, et cetera. But that was the slice that I projected onto Tim to bring in and talk about. So
I totally thought you were going Colbert. There's a bust of Colbert, Stephen Colbert, in my office. And I thought that was going to be it for sure.
We just want you to come in and talk about Stephen Colbert.
Yeah, come on in.
Excellent. Right up here.
So you've showed us a lot of work that you've done on the macro level, large biology. Have you had any projects where you are challenged with bringing the microscopic to life? And how is that different?
I threw a bunch of photos at the end of this, and I don't think that I've got anything that shows it off well enough. Within a group of 16 people, you get a variety of different, skill levels or preference or strengths, I guess is probably the best word. If I were still in the shop, I am large scale. I am broad stroke. I think what I was best at and what I was fastest at was the larger items. But there are people in the shop who literally will paint stuff with 2 hair brushes. And microscopic maybe not so much, but for the San Diego job we didn't get to do the cougar or the bighorn sheep, but we did a tremendous amount of little lizards and little frogs and little toads and so a lot of very, very small, very intricate little animals, anywhere from 1 inch to 4 inches long, so nothing super tiny, but things that had an ungodly amount of detail in them. Topo maps that have all these tiny little lettering that are all done by hand and things like that. So we're kind of up and open for anything, but certainly whatever we end up working on, there's obvious people in the shop. Sometimes it's the subject matter, and other times it is the scale. That's, if he tries to paint that, he will start bashing his head against the wall. If she does it, it'll be therapy, so yeah, we have two people who are really, just when it comes to a minute scale and precision, it's just astonishing to me, because it is clearly something I am not and never was good at. So now my job is to say, ooh, you should make this.
One quick question. I was interested in hearing how some of the things are sourced for your plants and your weird materials.
Yeah,
Any weird sourcing stories?
the materials in general are. I mean, it's just like the method. There's wood, there's steel, there's foam, there's fiberglass, and there's epoxy. That covers so much of what we do. Most everything is painted with latex paint. We make molds out of silicone. Our materials are really, really basic. When it comes to plants, if there's just simply no other way to get there, you can get a real leaf or sculpt a leaf and make a vacuform mold, and you can make individual leaves, but they'll just literally be completely unaffordable. So the way to go about doing that is, the shop term is Frankensteining. It is finding pieces and parts from, there's a couple online plant, flower and plant sellers, and then there's Bachman's, and there's Michael's, and there's places like that we go to, and the folks who focus on the plant work at our shop, when those kind of jobs come up, they go shopping with a big, like an iPad filled with photos, and they start looking for, this type of petal on the flower, and they start looking at things, say, we could take that petal, and if we just trimmed it this way and did the little serrated edges on the ends, and so if you've got the vision for what something might be able to become, then you can source pieces and parts. Every once in a while, when we do contemporary animals, we can buy antlers, get taxidermy noses. We use glass eyes, things like that. Because to us, anytime you can find something that can be used or modified, it makes it more affordable, and not in a, we could do this for less money. It makes it more affordable in a, ooh, you know what else we can make you? So yeah, if we can find pieces and parts for anything, we do. But the vast bulk of what we do ends up being foam, fiberglass, epoxy, steel, and wood.
I find it very interesting this evening and other times to see how we got to where we are, or how you got to where you ended with these things. Do any of the museums suggest that maybe you have a small exhibit concurrent with the dioramas saying this is how we did this? Or are you going to do that at the Bell when you build the new one?
Okay. And I'm sorry, I lost the second half of that.
I can translate that a little bit just because of the noise of the door here.
Okay.
I think you were asking that one of the most interesting things is the process itself, which is why I'm glad you said that, because that was the whole point of bringing
Thank
you in
you,
here.
because I think so.
But and actually at the Bell for a long while, we did have a making of the dioramas exhibit. It's been traded out for something right now that went kind of through the history of dioramas and how ours were made and some of the processes. So you're asking if you've ever explored maybe making an exhibit of your own process?
Oh.
Or have a museum has any museum ever asked you to do that for an exhibit?
Yeah, no one has asked us. I tend to, I don't know if you want to say I'm a walking exhibit. I tend to, like I said, I don't speak publicly about this sort of things, but I don't have a problem ever talking. I talk endlessly about what we do. We've never been asked to do something physically, but we've been asked multiple times because I'm kind of a stickler about sending photos. That's kind of like a big part of my job is if we're doing a large job once a week, I'm going to go take progress shots of everything. I'm going to send them to the client. There's been a lot of times when people have come back and said, those photos you sent us, do you think we could use those on our website? Because I think other people find the process fascinating. I find the challenges, the surprises, the difficulties, this will be great. Oh, You mean it can't weigh more than 200 pounds? So that problem-solving end of it and the process we go through to get there, I think, is very interesting to me. I think other people find that interesting as well. No one has asked us to make something in parts that show the process, but I've seen the Bell had one. They have some great things at the Denver Museum of Science and Nature. I haven't been there for years. They used to have them that showed how they made wax plants back, with the WPA, when the government said, fine, let's just have those 45 people just sit and make plants for the next 2 years or whatever they did. I mean, it's just phenomenal. This is the process they went through. And I think some of the stuff we do, I think is tremendously repetitive and laborious. And I look at what they were doing, it's just phenomenal. And it's really interesting to see, that. And I think that that era of diorama work, I mean, specifically stuff at the Bell, stuff at the American Museum, stuff at the Denver Museum of Science and Nature, there's things in there that we'll work our whole lives to aspire to even be able to have something that could be in the same gallery and not be laughed out the door, because that stuff is of a level that is unbelievable to me. And some of it, almost all of it is the skill level, but some of it does come down to, wow, look what we could do if we just had 40 people making plants nonstop for a year. That you could make some pretty phenomenal things.
I was just wondering, I mean, obviously you do things from the diorama to just like the standalone pieces. How many of those do you have going at any one time? I mean, you've kind of displayed like a fairly linear progression of that particular diorama, but do you have multiple projects at the same time? How do you manage the multitasking?
Yes, we always have multiple things going at once. The size and scope varies tremendously. We do things. We'll do a $2 million project that takes a year and a half to 2 years, simultaneously working on a $500,000 project and a couple $200,000 projects and a $2,000 thing here and a $500 thing there. So we do a wide variety of things, and sometimes it is budget driven. I mean, usually the larger the budget, the longer time period you have to work on. That is not always the case. So sometimes it goes both directions. Sometimes we work on something and you kind of work on it and say, like, let's just leave it alone and focus on this for a while, and it'll sit there untouched for a month or two because we're ahead of they have this tremendously long production schedule. That is a luxury that we get very rarely. Usually, and I mean, I don't even know how more clearly I can say this. This last year, we had an 11-month run where literally every week somebody was completely freaking out because it's impossible, we will never get this done, and then everybody started to hop on that bandwagon, and we won't get it done, we can't get it done by the due date, and it would all kind of start to fall together, and we get it done, and we get it out the door, and everybody would be like on that exhale of, I can't believe we got it done, when I'd be saying, here's what's due next Friday. And so we kind of have a lot of times where there are piles of things happening at the shop, and suddenly everybody needs to go and work on this over here. And then, okay, well, you two people pull off and you start this. Oh, wait, everybody, now let's focus over there. And we shift and roll because if you look at what we do, you can lay out a schedule and you can take your best guess, but it is really hard to tell how long something takes. And certainly, I mean, I'll use myself as an example. If I went back into the shop and there were two things to sculpt, well, if there were two Galapagos tortoises to sculpt for the American Museum of Natural History, I would say, I will do one, I really want to do one. And I'll sculpt one and Jim will sculpt the other. And I get interrupted and stuff during the day, but realistically, he is twice as fast as me. Where sometimes you've got all these things going, and just depending on who's working on it, someone who's done a bunch of that is very, very, very proficient at it and very good. And other people who end up with the exact same results, it's new. There's a learning curve. It's just slower. So yeah, we always have multiple things of multiple sizes going, and the target is moving. on a daily basis. And people tend to roll with me. And I try to explain that it's not my fault.
I think it's fair to say, we have to wrap up tonight, but I think it's fair to say that there are probably a handful of us here who wish they had known that this was something that a person could do as a career. And it still is, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so thank you so much for sharing these interesting stories. It's a little different than a lot of our talks, but this is really storytelling about what goes into the museum that you come to see at the Bell, and thank you all for being here, and thanks Tim for putting together his first ever PowerPoint this morning and talking in front of an audience.
Yeah. Thank you for your attention and your patience with my rambling.
Thank you all for coming.